Greetings, friends. I am Matthew Knabe, licensed professional counselor. You are listening to Experience Emerge. Today we will dive into another conversation about the broken and fractured aspects of our lives. Then we will discuss how we put these pieces back together again to find rest and live free. C.S. Lewis once said, "Miracles are a retelling in small letters of the very same story which is written across the whole world in letters too large for some of us to see." In today's episode, we are going to explore a story in hopes to gain a little bit of perspective on those larger letters. Honor. That will be the focus for the month of October for the podcast. How do we honor our pastors? Not that there isn't enough stress just being a pastor, but what about leading a congregation during a pandemic? Making decisions that undoubtedly will upset some of the congregation. It's got to be exhausting. Today, our guest mentions a study that was done that so many pastors won out because they're not doing what they signed up for when becoming a leader of a church. Well, it is my honor to bring on our guest for today. Not only does he come from a long line of pastors, but he has pastored for most of his life until changing paths earlier this year to really care for pastors and churches in a very unique way. Please welcome to the show, Pastor Jason Tourville.
Sure. Well, Matt, great to be here on the podcast with you and in connection with Emerge. Currently, I'm serving at the Pennsylvania-Delaware Ministries Center. It's the district of the Pennsylvania-Delaware states with the Assemblies of God. My role is I currently serve as the Director of Minister Care and the Director of Church Recalibration across our district. That just started this past January. And prior to that, for the last 25 years, I've been pastoring, both as a staff pastor, and the majority of that has been as a lead pastor as well. And so it's been an interesting transition, and it's been a year of change for everybody with COVID and so forth. But certainly, as we've been transitioning in this role, it's looked a lot different than the weekly schedule of pastoring.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about that transition this year. I mean, transitioning into a new role, especially when you've been pastoring for such a long time.
Sure. Well, pastoring, one of my favorite descriptions of pastoring, which we absolutely love, my wife Renee and I, we enjoyed our season of pastoring in the local church. Still, we remember it with such fondness. But the best description I've ever heard is it's like it's giving birth on Sunday and finding out you're pregnant on Monday. And man, there is a turnaround that happens in the weekly grind of ministry. You preach on Sunday morning, you got 6 days left before you got to do it again, and you're only as good as your last sermon. And so as we shifted gears, certainly there are some weekly rhythms. And I think one of the things that I've found in keeping healthy is learning your rhythms. In order to stay fresh, in order to stay whole, so that we're able to minister out of the overflow. And we're not praying for, Lord, quick, give me something because I'm feeling empty today. Is learning to find your rhythms. And I felt like I'd found that in pastoral ministry. But at the district level, I like to describe it, it's more like a yearly rhythm. And while we're still traveling almost on a weekly basis, where we're able to share it at other churches, it's just such a different element whenever you are more on a yearly schedule. And that's been the greatest adjustment. Now, certainly this year has provided an unprecedented, at least for me, amount of change as I was coming into a new role. And I don't know, I was here 6 weeks and then the world pandemic hit.
Yeah.
And so everything from all of our scheduled items, like many churches and businesses, the church was not the only one going through this. We had to figure out, what does that look like now? And our values is that we believe that ministry primarily happens at the local church level. And so that has been our focus from the district. The churches don't exist to support the district. The district exists to support the local church. And so we've had to change what we do, but primarily our mission remains the same. And whether you're a counseling center like Emerge, or whether you're a church or a district, you have to understand your mission And what you do will change over the years. And certainly we've had lots of changes over the last 6-7 months of the pandemic, but our mission hasn't really changed. And so we just changed how we do it.
Yeah. Can you talk to us a little bit about what this new role is?
The role that I'm able to fill now, which really I'm honored to be in this seat, it's a twofold role. The first of which is minister care. The second of which is church recalibration. I'll start with the latter. Church recalibration across our movement and on our networks specifically, someplace between 75 to 80% of all churches. Let me say that again, of all churches. Mm-hmm. So that's 3 and 4 churches are either plateaued over a long-term period, 5+ years, or they've been declining over the last 5 or more years. And so the trajectory of many of our churches is not heading in a healthy, life-giving trajectory. It's just the opposite. And so the church recalibration side is really a major focus for us, and it's becoming a major focus across America. For years, it was always church planting. Let's start and give birth to something new. And that still needs to be a focus of what we do and who we are. But of the thousands of churches, we realize now that we have to give some assistance in helping turn them in a healthy direction. And I don't know about you, Matt, but on a personal level, my health, I don't get healthy accidentally.
Right.
The chocolate cake my wife made for a recent holiday, I accidentally eat some of that. That comes easy. That's right. But it takes intentional focus to remain healthy personally. In our churches, so many times we get married to the method of how we do things and what it looks like and what our sanctuary feels like and the style of music. And we play with the mission. And it really needs to be the opposite. We need to date methods, but marry the mission. And so if I can boil it down to what we do, we try to make the main thing. And there's a variety of ways that we do that. Sometimes it's working individually with churches. Other times it's bringing them through a 2-year process, the pastor and the team. Because it's not just about changing the pastor. It's oftentimes about changing those in leadership in the church. That sometimes, if I can be frank, pastors have a struggle with helping them see outside their 4 walls of their church. Mm-hmm. And so how do you do that? Most people aren't bad. They just know what they know. Mm-hmm. And so that's that church recalibration side. The minister care side really focuses on the health of the pastor, the spouse, the marriage, the family unit as a whole. I truly believe that healthy ministries flow out of a healthy life, that we reproduce who we are. And so that's really the focus there. We've actually launched an Emerge counseling site here at our district offices. And so we are thrilled to be in partnership with Emerge. And this is both a resource to our community and to our network as a whole. So that's a little bit about what we're doing without getting too much and without me geeking out on it a whole bunch.
It's great. I mean, that's why I wanted to have you on the show is because of your expertise as being a pastor and also your role. And before we get into the topic that I want to talk about today, I wanted to talk a little bit about your connection with Emerge and how you got involved and how you and I kind of got to meet about almost exactly a year ago.
That's true. So first of all, Emerge has always had a dear place in my heart, dating all the way back to Doc Dobbins and listening to him and just the wisdom and the spiritual life that he was bringing to our movement and beyond the Assemblies of God at that time. I have not only pursued the direction of pastoral ministry, but my master's degree is in both marriage and family therapy and as a LPC, as a licensed professional counselor. And so the mental health side and the theology side of the psychology and theology have always been part and parcel in my mind to one another. The Lord Jesus certainly was a man who knew the scriptures well, but he also knew what was in the heart of man. And ministry is less about theology. It's important to know your theology, but ministry is all about people. And so to me, those two have come together. And so over the years, I've been attached to Emerge. In the last, I don't know what it's been now, 5 or so years, I've served on the Emerge board. And whenever the podcast was coming out, you and I started talking because of a podcast that I have historically run called Breakthrough Pastors. And so we started exploring, what does this look like? Who's your target audience? What problems are you guys hoping to solve? What do you guys bring to the table? What others aren't bringing to the table, right? And you guys are knocking it out of the park, man. Really enjoy the episode you guys are bringing to the table right now, Matt.
I appreciate it. I like I said, it was almost exactly a year ago that we were just kind of coming up with a concept of doing a podcast for Emerge. And you were literally the first person I went to kind of pick your brain, because I, about this time last year, had no idea what I was doing whatsoever. And I was like, Jason, I need to know everything you know about podcasting, because I don't know anything about it. But here we are a year later. I think we're about 16, 17 episodes deep, and it's awesome. It's really good. So today, what we're doing for the month of October is the topic of honoring pastors. And I think it's a great time to do this. Not only is this Honoring Pastors Month, but this year alone, I think, has been very difficult for so many different people, for so many different places, not only in the country, the world, but I think there's been a huge weight probably put on most pastors' shoulders this year, because we're constantly scrambling and trying to figure out. And certainly when the pandemic started, there was a lot of decision making. Some of the things that we talk about with pastors is about burnout, is about some of the pressures that they experience. So I wanted to talk with you today about your experience, and then some of the things that you might be able to share with not only pastors, but the congregation as well. And so I kind of want to open that up to you, to allow you to kind of just talk about your experience a little bit about pastoring, and some of your insight into what you've experienced.
Sure. Well, I do think this season of ministry has brought an extra weight, an extra load upon our spiritual leaders and our pastors. First, let me say, for all of our pastors listening out there, I completely know the spiritual weight you're carrying. I never realized it until I took a break midway through my tenure, went back to school. And about 2 weeks into being out of pastoral ministry, I went back to seminary. During a Sunday morning service, Matt, I broke down and wept. I couldn't figure out what was going on in that moment. It was just during the worship service. I mean, it was good worship, but nobody was really saying a word. Nobody was praying over me. And I just realized at that point that I had been carrying the weight of ministry, and it was wearing on me. And it wasn't until I took a few steps out of it, just for a very short season there, that I realized the weight it places on our shoulders. And for those of our listeners who are not ministers in a vocational sense, you're certainly ministers in the sense of the gospel sense, but you don't serve as a pastor. Until you've carried that emotional, spiritual, relational weight that is placed upon the role of pastors, whether it's right or wrong, be very sensitive to what they are going through. Not that you need to tiptoe around or walk on eggshells around them, but just understand, we covet your prayers. We are there for you. We have an audience of one, but we serve everybody. And that's always a delicate balance for us as pastors, that my audience is Jesus and Jesus alone. I want to please him. I want to serve him. But ultimately, we serve everybody around us. And it's important for us to always make that distinction. And so, over the years, what we've seen is that whenever there's an imbalance there, that all of a sudden our allegiance is to people. And the weight of the relational weight that oftentimes is experienced in ministry, Matt, overshadows our responsibility in our ministry to the Lord. Because everybody's called to minister to the Lord, and worship and prayer and study and so forth. That's our spiritual relationship. We're also called to minister to people. And whenever one gets out of whack with the other, oftentimes that's the pathway to burnout that we've seen. This season, and if I can just speak very specifically to what ministers are going through right now, I just read a study here recently that the vast majority of ministers that have been calling in and taking this one survey have been considering dropping out of full-time vocational ministry.
Wow.
The weight that they are experiencing, they did not give a statistic, otherwise I'd provide that for us. They said the vast majority of those that have been logging on. And that's been a lot of the conversations I've had. A lot of that revolves around anytime you have to learn new skills. You talked about learning the skills of podcasting, or our pastors, God bless them, they've had to learn about podcasts. They've had to learn about live streaming videos. They've had to learn how to use new equipment that they never used before. Some of our churches were set up for that. I remember the first 3 weeks of the pandemic, I probably took 50 calls on how do I set up online giving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, for many of our churches, that was already in a practice. But I'm telling you, for many of our churches, whenever I went to our last pastorate, one of the transitions we made was from just typical in-basket giving. This sounds like a silly story to tell on a podcast, but this is where many of our pastors have lived. And I presented the idea. We were rebuilding the website, or really building a website, and we wanted to implement online giving. I presented that to our board. Whenever I left, we were about an 81-year-old church. So we're an older church, began back in 1938. And Matt, we had I'll call it a debate, but it was a heated debate about the validity and the spiritual validity of having online giving.
Wow.
And about 45 minutes to an hour into it, it felt like forever. I was like,
Right.
Seriously, are we having this conversation? I didn't realize this was a conversation I needed to have.
Yeah.
Because half the people were paying their bills online.
Right.
But and there were some legitimate concerns, so we talked those through. We ended the conversation with, I said, well, hey friends, maybe we can do this. For those that want to use online giving, they can use it. And if you don't want to use it, you don't have to.
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden, you see, like, the weight of the world was lifted off the board members' shoulders who were arguing against it. They said, okay, we're fine with that. And the two things I said, man, number one, I should have led with that.
Right. I was like, you should have opened up with that idea.
Yeah. But I was so taken back. But number two, I realized that sometimes whenever we're looking to change things, and so many of those 50 calls that I had received, they said, Pastor Jason, we've been talking about doing this for years, but my leaders wouldn't let me.
Wow.
And so that's the weight that oftentimes we see the struggle there. So then now they're shuffling, how do we do this? And thankfully we had some people across our district who much more tech savvy than I was, and I couldn't take care of 50 churches. So we began to disseminate that out and got them up and going. But those are the type of skills. And I think the weight of that, of learning from online giving to making sure it's connected with a bank, to learning the video streaming, and many of our churches, even as they learned it, they found the broadband width of their internet wasn't enough. So in the middle of service, they worked about 10 hours that week to make sure it happened, and then it would cut out in the middle of service.
Yeah. Yeah.
So just the utter frustration. And then one of our pastors, if I could just share this story, why many of them are just at the place of, is this worth it? As many of our churches have tried to now reintegrate post-quarantine. Okay, I wouldn't say we're really post-pandemic yet necessarily,
Right.
but post-quarantine, they're trying to figure out, well, what regulations do we need to put into place? Masks, no masks, social distancing. How do we do this so people are safe, but yet we can continue to worship together? One pastor had been having outside services for about a month and a half, maybe 2 months, and it was a time to move back inside, he felt like. And so they put the the suggestion out there, we're going to be wearing masks to our seats and from our seats. Once you sit down, we think it's safe. That's what we were hearing from the CDC and so forth. Well, they said it that Sunday. That Monday morning, 9 a.m., he gets a call. Pastor, I can't believe that you are buying into the hype of this pandemic and you're making us wear a mask. As long as I have to wear a mask, I'm never coming back to church.
Yeah.
And he tried to reason with them. He no longer is done with that phone call, feeling beat up, if I can be honest with you, because it was very accusatory. It wasn't, hey, Pastor, how can we work this through? He hung up with that when he got a second phone call. Pastor, I can't believe that, and it was just the opposite.
Yep.
That if you don't make everybody, are you not a good shepherd that you would keep us safe and require it?
Yeah.
And so that was 9, then 9:30. I had a Zoom call with a bunch of church recalibration pastors. By the time he was on that Zoom call, Matt, he said, "What do I do?
Yeah.
I'm so fed up. No matter what I do, somebody's mad at me." And they just say, "Is it worth it? This is not the gospel I signed up for."
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so that's what they're facing right now, and that's what many of our churches and pastors are experiencing. And in addition to the typical weight of ministry, this has added the additional weight.
Yeah, I think it's a strange time. And, you know, being a mental health therapist, I've worked with pastors going through this process, and being in a situation where you cannot make your congregation happy, no matter what you do. That's such an added weight to the role that they already have. I mean, prior to the pandemic, being at Emerge, I mean, we service a lot of pastoral leaders and pastors. There's already a load of different stressors that they have to experience in life. And then you start adding this stuff in, it becomes a whole different process and animal to be able to do.
Yes.
Jason, if you can talk to us a little bit, we were talking before a little bit about honoring pastors from a congregation perspective. What would you like to share with people who are regularly attending church and people who have a pastor that they are underneath?
Sure. So, of course, October is Pastor Appreciation Month.
Yeah.
First, I want to say, this is not just a patent date. Now, it's interesting to me that there's so many dates that are given to things now. There's there's National Sunglass Day. There's National what was it? Chocolate Kisses Day.
Yeah,
I saw recently. There's a national day for everything. I'm like, goodness gracious, I'm overwhelmed with all that. And I would say, don't lump in this portion with it. Number one, bringing honor to spiritual leaders, to pastors, is very, very biblical. We see this throughout Scripture from the Old into the New, and I'll focus in on the New Testament, but it is very critical for us to understand that honoring the pastor doesn't just bless the pastor, it blesses the congregation. There's a spiritual activity that whenever we honor others, we ourselves receive the blessing. Right? Scripture constantly talks about the give and it will be given unto you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over. That's not just about finances. It's how we treat people. It's how we honor them. And so for the congregants out there, especially those in the role of a deacon, or if there's a ministry team or board members or whatever roles and functions that you have in your local church, I would encourage you to lead this conversation. Start it. It was always awkward. In every church I was a part of, we tried to instill in its leadership, recognizing that we never had plans of leaving, but I probably won't be their pastor for the next 80 years. Mm-hmm. Right? So I wanted to make sure that if the Lord were to ever move me on, which he always did, that they would be prepared and have been taught well to learn to honor the position of a pastor and of a spiritual leader there. And so, so I would encourage our congregants, number one, start the conversation. Mm-hmm. Okay. Second, I would really encourage, make it a public celebration.
Mm-hmm.
This is not something done in the back of an office, although, there's many ways to honor people and it's not always in a public setting, but your pastor has a public role, right? They serve people in the public and they have a public ministry from the pulpit. And so I think it's very important tell your pastor, say, Pastor, we're preparing something. Don't just blindside them on a Sunday morning, because many of our pastors have a lot of plans and want to make sure you have enough space. And it does not need to be a 45-minute of honoring This Is Your Life either. I would say, make it succinct, be very intentional with how you honor. If you want to have a couple people share, that's fine. But also talk about the biblical mandate of honoring. Paul talks quite a bit about this, that those that teach the word of God receive a double portion, a double honoring that's there. And so talk about that. There's plenty of resources. If you don't know where to begin, can I just make a suggestion? There's this wonderful new tool that's out, Matt. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. It's called Google.
Brand new.
Brand new. Yeah.
On the World Wide Web.
The World Wide Web, yes.
Right.
And Google honoring your pastor or Pastor Appreciation Month. And you can find some resources, some scriptures that are there. There will be a tool for you. So make it public. You start the conversation, make it public. And one thing that's been a blessing to me, if I could just put this nugget in there, that if you take care of my wife and kids, you've blessed me.
Yeah.
And I've always appreciated, the gifts. Oftentimes they provided room for a financial token of appreciation. And let's just be honest, we all like financial tokens.
That's right. Yeah.
But man, if you take care and bless my wife and my kids, to me, that speaks volumes to me, because I'm not just a pastor.
Right.
I'm a husband and father too.
Yeah.
And our kids go through things, and I won't go through all the stories of what our kids have gone through. Our wives, I can't tell you the weight that I carry, my wife feels in ministry. And if you take care of them on Pastor Appreciation Day, in addition, to me, I just believe the Lord's blessing will rest upon those that are doing it and the congregation itself. I truly do.
Yeah. That's really good stuff. I appreciate that. Maybe from a pastoral perspective, then, talk to me a little bit about some of the stuff you and I were talking about earlier was, from a mental health perspective, I'm always talking with clients, we're teaching people how to treat us. Maybe from a pastoral perspective, talk to me a little bit about that.
So how to treat us as pastors, as a marriage and family therapist, Matt, that resonates with me, because we teach people how to treat us in relationships.
Yes.
And so what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. For instance, I was talking with a wife one time, and the husband, he was just rude.
Mm-hmm.
He was obnoxious. They'd been married for something like 15 years, and she didn't like it, but she allowed it.
Mm-hmm.
And one time it happened in real time as they were sitting on my couch, and I looked at and I saw her just kind of get defeated. I said, "Why do you allow that?"
Yeah.
Because allow what? What he just said to you and how he said it. And he kind of reared up, and he actually tried to intimidate me at first. Well, who are you to say how I can talk? I said, I'm nobody, but I know what the Bible has to say. He had a great value of the scriptures, but a terrible understanding.
Right.
That's a dangerous mix there.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden it was like a light bulb as we talked through that, that she can dictate how she values herself and is treated. And sometimes, as a pastor, we have to teach our congregations how to treat us. Mm-hmm. And at first, it can feel self-serving. If nobody brings up Pastor Appreciation Month, Pastor, can I tell you right now, bring it up yourself. Mm-hmm. And you don't have to tell them what to do, but there's been a few times over the years with new boards or in a new situation. And, I would bring it up in a board meeting. Let me just give you an example, teaching them how to treat. And I said, I would bring it up. So I know that October is Pastor Appreciation Month, and I know you all appreciate me, I would tell them. And you guys have loved on me and my family so well. But I think it's important for us to teach our church as well. And so I don't necessarily want to dictate anything, but what are your thoughts? How can we lead our church to learn how to honor spiritual leadership? And I would let them define it, but I'd had to start the conversation early on. As the years went at each church, I didn't have to initiate the conversation, thankfully, because it was a little awkward.
Sure.
But yet at the same time, but then it wasn't just the big moments. There was also other times, small moments of teaching my board or leadership or church how to treat me and my family. Oftentimes, and pastors might resonate with this out there, people felt very free to not just criticize me, but to criticize my wife and my kids. And, and as a man, not even speaking as a pastor, as a man, you can say what you want about me. I can pretty much handle it. I mean, we'll have to have a conversation, but you go after my girlfriend, my wife. That's what I call my wife. I don't have a girlfriend and a wife. Let me just clarify that there.
I was like, we're going to have to clarify that real quick because that's going to get confusing.
Yeah. But that's what I tell my kids. Hey, you better talk nice to my girlfriend. She was my girlfriend way before she was your mother.
That's right.
And but you come after my wife, who was not a paid pastor. She just, she believed her role was to serve me and my family. That's quite another conversation. And so we would have to have that. And there was a few times where I had to defend as a husband as well as a pastor. No. This conversation does not happen about my wife. If we want to have this outside of a board meeting, we can have that. But we will not operate like this. Yeah. And the same thing had to happen with my kids. My kids, I love them, and they're all serving the Lord right now. But during the teenage years, God bless them. There were times I wanted to take them out, Matt.
Right.
Especially the boys. And so I understood, congregates, but we can't hold them to a different standard. They're going to fail sometimes. They're going to mess up. They're going to be obnoxious. They're going to have an attitude, whatever. And I had to teach our congregations, it's not okay for you to sit on your perch and judge the pastor's family. There's something very toxic for a church culture whenever people place themselves in a place of evaluation. My job is to evaluate you. Yeah. And there's something very toxic about that. So those conversations, they would happen very quickly. I did not allow them to fester. Infections, if you don't take care of them right away, can cause you to remove an entire limb.
That's right.
Of your body. And all wounds hurt, but not all wounds have to get infected.
That's right. Yeah.
And so we dealt with the wounds very quickly. I tried not to deal with it, take it overly personal. Mm-hmm. That was tough. Yeah. Because you talk about my kids and my wife, it's personal.
Yeah. We've moved into a different area.
Yep. Yeah. But I also realized that oftentimes these are systemic issues, that whenever people are struggling, whenever they're mad, it's not always about me. It might be directed toward me and my family.
Yeah.
But oftentimes it really didn't have that. The other piece is, honestly, Matt, sometimes me, my wife, my kids, we're not perfect.
Yeah, that's right.
And they may have seen some things that were very accurate. Mm-hmm. But yet it's that evaluation, like it's that judgment. Mm-hmm. piece that is very toxic. And so if I sense the right heart, I say thank you for bringing that to my attention. But I just want to make sure we understand each other's roles here. Yeah. And I'm going to pray about that. And I really would. I know it wasn't just to sweep it under the rug. But if I sensed that it was that judgmental, evaluatory mentality, I think it was very important for me, both as dad and husband, but also as pastor to teach them, how do you value the role of the man or woman of God? And nobody else can teach them that except for you.
Yeah.
The only other way you do that is at times we would have a spiritual leader that's well along in years beyond where I was come in and teach on something like that, on a pastor appreciation Sunday or at a different time. And they always knew to instill value for that role. And so those are a few pieces that come to my head. I don't know if that's answering the question that you were looking for there.
It's great. I think what I hear you saying is in these certain circumstances, pastors have the right to put up healthy boundaries. Like there are certain places where, even though I guess I relate this a little bit, and a little bit about my history. I was a touring musician for a long time. When you're in the public eye and you're out front, you're much more open to public criticism. And I know every time we came out with a record, you couldn't make everybody happy. It's like, oh, they don't sound the same. And then other people would be like, oh, they sound just like the old record. And, it was a constant, it was a constant thing. Like every time we put a new song out, we knew 50% of our listeners would be like, this is terrible. And then the other 50% would be like, this is great. But, when you're out front like that and you're in the public eye, you're kind of opening yourself up for those criticisms. But also, I think for me, I remember there was a time I spent way too much time, online reading the critics. And I had to put that boundary around myself to go, you know what, I don't have to read every review that comes out and allow that to infiltrate my mind and get down about every criticism that may come through. So I think that's a really good way of looking at putting healthy boundaries around yourself.
As far as the scripture, whenever the Apostle Paul is teaching young Timothy how to navigate the weight of ministry and the public role, I like what he talks about. And man, this applies to our day of social media so well, where before people had to have the chutzpah to come and confront you face to face, or to gossip, in person. Now people post more than ever should be said about anybody online. Right.
Yeah.
And so, but 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 4, I love what the Apostle Paul teaches his young protege. And as he does this, it's really in the context of leading a local church and leading a ministry. And he says this, he says, no one serving as a soldier gets entangled in civilian affairs, but rather he tries to please his commanding officer. And sometimes, what does Proverbs say? It is to a man's benefit to overlook an offense. We don't have to respond to every single statement out there.
Yes.
If you do, you're going to be running around, and that's all you're going to do.
Yeah, that'll be your full-time job.
That's your full-time job, to defend your own honor.
That's right.
And I love this analogy that the Apostle Paul brings to the table, that ultimately we're here to please our Heavenly Father. And it really does begin there. Am I doing what God has called me to do? I will never do it perfectly. I will never do it as well as compared to the other pastor down in a different state or down the street or whatever. It's not a comparative game, but am I doing what God's called me to do? And so I think for us as pastors, it's important to remember not to be involved in all the civilian affairs. We have to be with the people, but at the same time, we have to lead from out front. And whenever you're out front, it's a lot easier to get stones thrown at you.
Absolutely. Jason, I appreciate you so much. Is there anything else you would like to leave pastors or the congregation as we start to wrap up here?
Yeah, both with the congregants and the pastor here in the season, since there has been such a heightened level of stress and pressure for all those who are leading and in charge of local ministries, I would implore you, make sure you take some time off. Find that rhythm now. Take a week, minimum of a week, if not 2 weeks off. Friends, if your pastor hasn't done that, don't tell them you don't want to see them. Just say, Pastor, we're concerned about you long term, and we want to provide full pay some time off there. And there's two things there. Number one, some vacation time off. But secondly, make sure you're at least taking one Sabbath day rest.
Good.
Not just a day of worship on Sunday, a Sabbath day rest. This is the day you don't create, you don't lead. Matt, I like to say it's not rest if my first name is still pastor.
Yeah, that's true.
So you have to get outside of that role. And whether it's with family or if you have friends from back in the day, whatever that looks like for you, or maybe it's crawling up with a warm book, a book in a warm fire. I don't know, whatever that looks like. Find those ways to recharge.
If you can find a warm book.
Yeah, I'm looking at the candles behind you here. So
that's right.
I was wanting to
I've got a lot of warm books back there. That's great.
So, yeah, so that's what I would leave with our leaders and with our congregants. Let's make sure that we're provoking each other toward health and holiness.
Jason, I really do. I appreciate you very much. And, I as we talked about earlier, this podcast, I really appreciated the time you spent with me via email, and then the time we spent in person together. And, the other part of this is you being on the board at Emerge, I think is another asset to what we do as Emerge Counseling Center, and then just your insight and your experience as a pastor, and then the role you're in. So thank you so much for being on the podcast. I'm glad I feel like we've kind of come full circle in a little way, that we're kind of celebrating a year from the inception of this idea of the XM podcast. So I appreciate you so much. Thanks for your time.
Hey, thanks for allowing me to speak into this. God bless you, Matt.
You too, my friend. God bless. Well, that was great to spend time with Pastor Jason. I am so appreciative of him and the investment he has made, not only in being a board member at Emerge, not only pastoring and the role that he's in now, but the time he invested in me. Honoring our pastors is such an important thing for us as a church to not take lightly. Burnout is a real thing. In our next episode, we're going to take a little closer look about honoring pastors from a clinical perspective. So you're not going to want to miss that. Thank you for listening. Please go to emerge.org or find our Facebook page, Instagram, for more updates on who we are as a ministry. Well, until next time, or when our Savior comes, God bless.